Hello, welcome back to the channel. Time for more Nowhere Emporium. I'm going to get on today because there's a few, I want to get about 3 chapters done. This is quite a lot to read. Starting with chapter 5, I believe. Yeah. It's called Through the Doors. Daniel's eyes cracked open a fraction. He screwed up his face at the single lit flooding in the room. He sat up and rubbed his eyes with his knuckle. The blurred edge of his mind began to focus. He lay in a small, comfortable bed in a cosy room with an arched wooden roof. At the opposite end of the room was 2 doors, one of which was open. Through the open door, Daniel could hear the sounds of a bird song and the babbling whisper of running water. He shuffled to the edge of the bed, swung his legs from beneath the thick duvet. His bare feet sank into a deep carpet. Memories came bursting back. Of running through Glasgow, Spud chasing him close behind, of the horror of the car coming towards him, of the hitting of the hard ground. Daniel climbed from the bed and stumbled towards a small mirror that hung between the doors. He gazed at his reflection, expecting to see cuts and bruises, but there were no marks on him, no sign that he'd been hurt at all. A great fear began to build in his chest. His lungs tightened. His head spun. What if he had been hit by the car? Am I dead? He did not have time to contemplate his question because a flicker of movement drew his attention to the window, and he realised that a girl was staring at him through glass. He stumbled backwards as she moved to the door. She stood in the doorway, brushing long wild curls from her grey eyes. She looked him up and down, arms crossed. "Enjoy your snooze, did you?" she said. "Nice and comfy?" She looked around the room and shook her head. "Unbelievable. This is nicer than my room." "Who are you?" said Daniel. "Where am I? Am I dead?" The girl screwed up her face and took another step into the room. "Dead? What you want about? Why would you be dead?" Daniel blinked. But I was standing right in the middle of a busy road. A car was coming to hit me." The girl tapped her foot on the floor. "He must have saved you. I wonder why. What's your name?" "Daniel," said Daniel. "Who are you talking about? Who must have saved me?" But the girl was already opening the blue door, the one that had been closed. "This is all very strange," she said. No one ever new shows up here." She narrowed her eyes. "Nobody real, anyway." "Stay put. I'm going to find out exactly what's going on." And then she slipped off through the blue door before Daniel could ask her name, or why she was interested in him, or what she meant about nobody real ever showing up. Daniel patted himself on his chest. He felt real. He certainly didn't feel dead. Then again, how would he know what being dead felt like? He stared at the door through which the girl had left and tried the handle. The door was locked, so he went in for the second door, and then he went to the second door, the open one. A hilltop view lay before him, patchwork fields and a forest beyond, under a crystal blue sky. The air was warm and sweet as honey. Daniel stepped down some narrow wooden stairs into a meadow of waist-high grass. He realised he'd been in a wooden caravan, the sort of wagon he imagined travelling folk might use, or as circus performers in the olden times. The wagon was painted in a deep, shimmering blue, decorated with gold flourishes. Something struck him then. If this was all real, how could the girl possibly have left through a door inside the wagon? He was thirsty. His tongue was sticking to the roof of his mouth, and he moved towards the stream, bent down and drank. The water was ice cold and pure, and probably the best drink he had ever had. "Ah, awake, I see." At that sound of the voice, Daniel spat out a mouthful of water, spun, caught a fleeting glimpse of a dusty grey suit, and then tripped over his own tangled feet, tumbling into the grass. "Oh, very graceful," said the man in the suit. "The Royal Ballet will be knocking on the door any time now." Daniel scrambled to his feet, rubbing his elbow, and recognised the owner of the Nowhere Emporium immediately. "You! What are you doing here? What am I doing here? Am I dreaming?" The man in the dusty suit scratched his nose. His wild hair swayed in the breeze. "We're all dreaming, Daniel Holmes, in our own way. Follow me, if you will." And at this he turned and marched up the wooden steps and into the wagon. Daniel hurried after him. "Wait, where's the girl?" he asked. once they were inside. Girls, the man said, don't bother yourself with her. You have more important things to think about at the moment. He opened the blue door and indicated to the shadowy beyond. This way, all will be explained. Daniel took a slow step towards the door. He peered through the door. That's not right, he said. That can't be right. Beyond the blue door was a square entrance hall, like the inside of a castle that seemed to climb up and up forever, crisscrossed with 100 or 1,000 entangled and entwining staircases, all lit by flickering gold, a glow of a torchlight. The man in the suit stepped into the hall. Don't look so worried, he said. Nothing can harm you in here. I checked the corridors yesterday, caught the last of the escaped lions. He wheeled away and began to stride across the hall. Daniel was unsure what to do. He watched the man in the suit, and then his eyes widened. Lions? He said. Hey, wait up, wait up. See? Lots of things you can draw on that one. The nice field, the caravan, the castle staircases. Right, chapter 6. A bargain with Lucian Silver. Would you like a cup of tea? The man in the grey suit sat behind the desk, stirring a tea in a china cup. No, said Daniel. He watched a small whirlpool form in the liquid and tried to sound braver than he felt. No tea, thank you. Just tell me what's going on. He had followed the man across the hallway, passing dozens of staircases, to another doorway, this one with a curtain of a deep red velvet. When he brushed through the curtain, Daniel found himself back in the Emporium. The man in the suit sipped at his tea, then returned the cup to his saucer on the desk. There really is no way of making what I'm about to tell you any easier for you to hear or comprehend, he said. So here it is. Daniel Holmes, you should be dead. And at this he stood and began to wander back around the shop, his hands clasped behind his back. Allow me to explain. My name is Lucian Silver. I am a traveller. This Emporium is my means of transport. It dances through time, taking me from city to city, town to town, village to village, all over the globe. Through time, said Daniel. Like Doc Brown. Mr. Silver gave him a blank look. Who? Doc Brown, said Daniel. You know, Marty McFly, Back to the Future? It's an old movie I saw at the children's home. Doc and Marty had a time machine. Mr. Silver shrugged. I do not go to the cinema much, he said. His grey eyes sparkled in the light of the fire. And my Emporium is not just a time machine. He pointed to the red curtain. Beyond that curtain, beyond the many staircases we have just passed, lie my wonders. Think of the Emporium as being like a tree. The whole of the staircases that you just walked through, that is the trunk. Branching off are passageways, hundreds of them, where the wonders lie. Wherever I visit, customers are drawn to this place for a small fee. I allow them to step through the curtain and experience what it is like to fly among the endless stars, to taste the colour of a sunset, to explore the very boundaries of imagination. I allow them to visit my wonders. Of course, I cannot allow my customers to remember what they have seen in the Emporium. Not anymore. Many years ago, when the shop first opened, they remembered everything. But we soon became much too busy to cope with the crowds. Now they leave with a foggy glow of happiness, perhaps even the sense that their life had changed forever, but they cannot recall the shop. To them, it is as if it never existed. Lunar photobomb in the back. He frowned, and a sudden weight seemed to cause him to sag. When you ran away, strayed onto that road, you nearly died. Daniel opened his mouth, but found his throat thick and choked. If that's true, if I nearly died, then why am I here? How did I get out alive? Because I interfered, said Silver. I saved you, Daniel. I don't know if it was the right thing to do. It was not an easy decision to make. But the day you returned to the Emporium, the moment I realised you remembered being here the previous day, I knew you were special. I knew there must be a reason why you came to my attention. What sort of reason? I don't know yet, said Mr. Silver, drumming his fingers on his chin, but I'm offering you the chance of a lifetime, my boy, the chance of 100 lifetimes. Come with me, learn about the Emporium, prove that I was right to interfere. See the world in a way that nobody else can. What do you say? Daniel said nothing. He stared out of the Emporium's window. Glasgow was hidden behind a veil of thick, swirling fog. You need persuasion, said Mr. Silver, seeing it. Seeing is believing, or so they say. He strode towards the shop door, reaching for an elaborate metal instrument on the wall. To Daniel, it looked like a complicated cross between a clock and a compass. There were many dials and rings of numbers set with smaller rings. Mr. Silver began to manipulate the hand of the instrument. When he was satisfied, he spun and headed for the fire, scooping a handful of coal from a bucket on the floor. He tossed the coal into the fire. There was a great roar, and the flames became so bright Daniel shielded his eyes. For the briefest moment, the flames burned a deep red, and the fire exploded. As Daniel coughed the soot from his lungs, a bar of bright sunlight began to burn through the smoke. When the soot had settled, Mr. Silver stood by the door of the Emporium and opened it with a flourish. See for yourself, he said, Daniel. Excuse me. Daniel stepped into the doorway and felt a warm breeze on his face. He'd been expecting, of course, to look out onto Glasgow Street to see shoppers bustling past, weighed down with bags. But that's not what he saw. He inched out the door onto a wide walkway. The air was warm, the sky awash with deep reds and purple. Beyond the walkway was a road. Where a road surely should have been, there was a canal lined with tall, narrow buildings, all columns and spirals in colourful shapes. What happened to Glasgow? Daniel said, ducking back into the Emporium as a passing old woman laden with a heavy basket stopped and peered suspiciously at him. Mr. Silver shut the door and made the sign on the window read, closed. We left, he said, as though this was the most regular occurrence in the world. That's Venice. We're in Venice now. He glanced at the instrument on the wall. The year is 1854, July, I believe. Daniel craned his neck to get a better view from the window. He wiped the glasses, which were foggy, from his breath. He tried to find some words. It's impossible. Yet we are here, said Mr. Silver. Daniel felt the need to sit down. So this is really? Indeed, said Silver. But I mean, how? Just how? Daniel's eyes widened. It's magic, isn't it? It has to be. How else can we have just come from a caravan in a meadow that's inside a room? There's no other way from all of this to be real, to be happening. Mr. Silver smiled. One thing at a time, Mr. Holmes. One thing at a time. And you want me to come with you, all around the world? A pause. Daniel narrowed his eyes. What's the catch? The catch, Daniel Holmes, is that you will work to earn your place here. What I am offering is not a holiday. It is an opportunity, a challenge. You must show me I was correct to bring you here, and that you are, as I suspect, special. If you succeed in the Emporium, it will become your home. What happens if I don't come up to scratch? Said Daniel. You sack me, leave me somewhere halfway around the world? 100 years before I was born? I'll do no such thing, said Mr. Silver. If you do not belong in the Emporium, you will simply be returned to your own time, your old life. He offered a hand. So, do we have a bargain? Daniel organised the facts in his mind. He was an orphan, leading a miserable life. He didn't have any friends. A gang of bullies had made it their mission to ensure his life was uncomfortable as possible. He was lost. And now he'd been invited to escape. All of that and travel through time in a magical shop with a man he suspected was either a genius or a lunatic. Or maybe both. He had the opportunity to be someone else, even if it was just for a while. And if he was someone else, maybe he wouldn't feel so alone. I'll do it, he said. Let's see how long the next chapter is. Yeah, should we have another one? Yeah, let's go. Right, it's called Chapter 7, Opening Night. Next morning, as Daniel dressed, he stared out of his window on the wagon at the blazing sun low in the morning sky. He did not trust his own eyes. As far as Daniel could tell, his wagon and the meadow outside it were somehow contained inside a room within the shop. How did it all work? How did Mr. Silver bring outside, inside? Was it like a movie set, an illusion? If he was a bird flying in the sky above the wagon, Would he only get so high and reach a wall? The familiar sound of beating wings and Mr. Silver's gleaming magpies glided through the open door. They fluttered around his head and touched down on his shoulders, stamped their feet and pecked at him. They twitched their heads and flapped this way and that. Get ready, no time to lose, they seemed to be telling him. Daniel finished getting dressed. The magpies chased him out of the door, across the hallway of the stairs and through the curtain. Mr. Silver was waiting behind the desk in the shop in front. The only downside to travelling by flame, he said, expecting Daniel to know what he was talking about, is the mess it tends to create. He ran his hands along a tabletop, coating his fingertips in a thick layer of soot. Your official Emporium duties, in the beginning at least, will consist of keeping the front shop presentable. I expect this place to be shining when they open to the public this evening. Daniel glazed around the soot-covered room. When do we open? Silver raised a finger, shook off the soot. Our doors open at twilight and close at dawn. And so, with an exciting buzz through him, and a job to keep his mind busy, Daniel set to work, cleaning and tidying and clearing the place of soot. Everything was filthy. How long had it been since Mr. Silver had last cleaned? Daniel adjusted columns of books and polished the silver and jet stones pieces of beautiful chess set. Every time he turned away, the piece would move around the board as though they were playing a game to two invisible opponents was underway. So much work made the day rush past, and by early evening the day had melted to twilight. Daniel became aware that a curious crowd was beginning to gather outside. He peered out through the window. Why have they not come before now? He said. We've been here for 2 days. Mr. Silver, who was at his desk writing in his battered old book, barely glanced up. Most of them haven't noticed us until now, he said. Daniel narrowed his eyes. You mean you haven't let them notice, don't you? To which Mr. Silver only smiled. Then at last, Silver snapped his book shut, locked it away in a drawer, stood up and threw on his coat. Showtime, he said, patting his hair in a futile attempt to flatten the wild tangle. The door of the Emporium creaked open. Silence poured into the shop, deep and electric. Daniel held his breath, listening to the drumbeat of his own heart. Mr. Silver held out his right hand, then waved his left hand over it. Only a moment ago there had been nothing but empty space. A dove sat in his palm, white feathers glowing in the light of the fire. Daniel breathed 100 different scents: chocolate and wood fire, pipe smoke and cinnamon. Mr. Silver's grey eyes shone as he released the dove and watched it fly out into the darkness. Welcome to the opening night, Daniel Holmes. A flash of light illuminated the darkened sky. Then the customers began to come. Their eyes grew wide as they caught the sight of the treasure within the Emporium. Grown men and women became like children once more, anxious to touch and inspect every shiny trinket. When they noticed the curtain, Mr. Silver would pull back the material with a flourish, inviting them to witness the wonders behind. Daniel watched with fascination as they filtered through. His mind fizzed with curiosity. This is supposed to be a shop, he said. How come nobody's buying anything? Mr. Silver wagged a finger. That, Daniel, is where you are wrong. Come with me. The moment he stepped back through the curtain, Daniel knew something magical had happened. The entrance hall, full of staircases once seeped in a shadow and silence, had become alive with warmth and light. The soft flicker of torches had intensified, reflecting and dancing on the sparkling walls. Aromas of caramel and spice had filled the air. The hallways were dotted with performers and vendors, men and women scattered here and there at the foot and summit of the stairways. Each was dressed in a combination of black and shimmering gold. Some handed out candy floss or caramel apples or warm chocolate pies. Others performed magic tricks or juggled and swallowed swords. There were no two identical. Where did they all come from? Said Daniel, asking a bare-chested man who was breathing fire. The flames formed the sharp of a pouncing tiger, and then the elephant, and finally a dragon. From within, said Mr. Silver. As they walked, they passed several customers, chattering excitedly about the rooms that contained impossible things, oceans and deserts, and the windows to the stars. A little girl tugged on the sleeve of her mother's coat. I saw a dragon, Mama, she was saying. A real dragon with fire breathing and wings and spiky black tail. I can't understand what they're saying, said Daniel, who had then at that moment forgotten that he was in a foreign country and that these people were not speaking English. "Of course you can," said Silver. What use would I have for an assistant who could not communicate with my customers? You can now understand and speak any language that you need." Daniel tried to remain cautious, suspicious even, mostly because he cared about tending to hang around for a long time, but wondered how to begin to chip away at his armour. "Are there other shops like this?" he asked. "Is there more magic out there?" "There is nowhere else like my emporium," Mr. Silver said. "There is a magic, certainly, plentiful, but it exists at the edges of things, in the corner of the eyes and the back of the mind. Our world is filled with the extraordinary, Daniel. For many reasons, most people only see things they wish to see. They are afraid of anything that cannot be explained by scientific formula or writing in textbooks, so they ignore the unknown. For those of us who open our eyes, those who truly dare to wonder, there is treasure everywhere." They went around to a sharp bend and through a tunnel of black stone to a door set in a corridor of black slate. A golden nameplate was attached to the centre of the door, and looping letters spelled out the fountain. Mr. Silver reached into his coat, producing a crimson scarf and gloves, pulling them on with great care. He opened the door. The cold breath of winter brushed Daniel's face, and he sucked in a deep lungful of air. It smelled like December morning. Mr. Silver's feet crunched on the ground as he stepped through the door. Daniel followed, moving through the dim hallway to a clean sunlight. He was standing on a frozen pond in the middle of a thick woodland. Everything around him glittered with a coat of frost, from the tips of the tall trees to the forest floor. In the centre of the pond stood a simple fountain, made from 3 circular tiers of stone, and then a silvery liquid flowed over the stones. Mr. Sir smiled at the look of Daniel's face. "You'll question whether my customers are actually buying anything. I can assure you that they are. I sell them amazement. I am a merchant of wonder." He leaned over and gathered a pile of frost from the frozen pond, rubbing it between his gloved fingers. "But my customers do not pay for their experience in the Emporium with coins or notes. No, my price is a piece of their imagination." Daniel took one step back. "Oh, it's easily done, if you know the way," said Silver. "Customers are free to wander through the doors, to be amazed and wonderstruck," he indicated. The silver solution that flowed over the fountain. "The Emporium takes a little of their brimming wonder, their imagination. Never enough for the customers to miss it, of course, and it becomes the liquid you see here. It is the fuel that powers everything you see. It's the lifeblood of the Emporium. Imagination is the root of magic." "Do they know?" said Daniel. In the pit of their stomach he felt sick, as if their imagination being extracted from the clueless customers. "Do you tell people what you're doing to them?" Silver shook his head. For a fleeting moment he looked old and fragile, standing in the frost. "It wasn't always this way. There was a time when I was a younger man that my imagination was enough. But I'm growing old. I must keep the Emporium running, and no harm comes to anyone. That is a promise. Imagination is alive. It grows in the mind like a tree. The Emporium merely clips a few of the branches. What a little I take grows back in time," he observed Daniel. "If this has changed things, if you wish to leave, you may do so. I will drop you back in your own time. Just say the word." Daniel stared at the fountain, at the silvery imagination flowing over the stones. He was filled with doubts and questions, and he was wary of Mr. Silver's power. He considered what it might be like to return to his life, to the rain-soaked streets of Glasgow, to loneliness, and to nobody. He looked into Mr. Silver's serious grey eyes. "I don't want to go back," he said. "I want to stay and see the world. I want to learn about magic. I want to know secrets. I want to be somebody." A smile played on Silver's lips. He bowed his head to Daniel. "As you wish." Something moved in the top of the trees, a blinding flash of a silver soaring into the blue sky. "How do you do that?" Daniel asked. "How do you make all of this?" "Tomorrow," said Mr. Silver. "Tomorrow I will start your lessons, and we will begin to find out if you have what it takes to become a part of the Nowhere Emporium. Tomorrow the first test awaits." "What sort of test?" But no answer came. Daniel stood alone in the frozen world, the only sign that Mr. Silver had made in the woodland, and all was a trail of footprints in the forest. That is the end of chapter 7. If any of you want to do a drawing of the scene, the drawing of the fountain, so keep playing this bit over that final chapter over the description and get that drawing done, because that is a very important room in the Emporium. Until tomorrow, I shall see you later. Bye.